The silence in the bathroom surrounded me, wrapping around me like a heavy, unspoken truth. The warmth of the water cascading down my body was meant to ease the tension that had gathered in every inch of my skin, but deep inside there was a growing unrest I couldn't shake. Something was coming, something I couldn't yet name, but it was approaching close, too close. I could feel it in my chest, a mix of excitement and dread that made my pulse race. The sound of water falling down the tiles almost deafening in its own way, but it could not drown out the storm within me. I reached down to wash my legs under the steady stream of water, but every motion felt different, somehow charged with energy, with something unspoken. My thoughts, usually so clear, were a tangle of uncertainty. What was this feeling? Why was my heart pounding so erratically? I felt torn in so many directions. I was alone at home, a rare quiet that had settled over the house. David, my husband, was away on a business trip. It had been days since we'd spoken properly, as he was buried in his work, leaving me to navigate the silence in this home that once felt full of life. But there was something else, someone else. Thomas. I could almost sense him without seeing him, a presence that seemed to linger in the corners of the house. It was absurd, of course. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be working late on his projects. But in the quiet of the house, I could almost feel him, like a shadow, watching me from just beyond the periphery of my thoughts. The uneasy flutter of my heart only grew stronger, tightening around my chest with every passing second. It was as though I could hear his footsteps echoing through the house, though I had yet to see him. And then the door opened. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as I stood there, unsure of what to do. I tried to remain calm, to keep control, but the sound of his footsteps growing closer, slow and deliberate, made everything inside me tighten. The water, which had once been a comfort, now felt like an impenetrable barrier between us, yet it couldn't shield me from the rising tension. The silence between us stretched, and I could feel it, thick and heavy, a palpable force hanging in the air. He was behind me now, still, like he was waiting for something, perhaps like he was waiting for me to decide how to break the stillness. His presence filled the space with a strange energy that made every nerve in my body stand on edge. "Eliza?" Thomas's voice finally broke the quiet. It was soft, almost hesitant, but there was a certain resolve in it that made my heart skip a beat. "I need you." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. But his words stirred something inside me, something I hadn't expected. It was as though his voice was a key, unlocking emotions I hadn't even known I was capable of feeling. My mind screamed for clarity, for reason, but my body didn't listen. My breath grew shallow, and I could feel my skin tingling as his presence seemed to draw nearer, inch by slow, deliberate inch. I stood there, motionless, my hands frozen in place beneath the warm water. I felt his gaze on me, as though he was studying me, reading the thoughts that I didn't know how to voice. I didn't know how to feel, didn't know what to do. Everything inside me was in turmoil. And yet, at the same time, there was a pull, an undeniable connection between us that was impossible to ignore. He took another step forward, and it felt as if the distance between us had become almost non-existent. The sound of the water filled the silence again, but now it was different. It was louder, as if it were amplifying the space between my racing thoughts and the emotions that were steadily rising within me. Thomas was close. So close. I could feel his presence like heat against my back, but I couldn't turn to face him. I couldn't make sense of anything. I was drowning in a mix of feelings, confusion, fear, longing, but mostly I was lost. Lost in a moment that didn't seem to have a beginning or an end. "Eliza," he said again, this time softer, almost pleading. "Please, I need you." His words were a pull, a weight that I couldn't escape. The words themselves were simple, but the intensity behind them stirred something deep within me. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to face him, to understand what this was, what this connection was between us, that felt like a storm waiting to break. But I was paralyzed, unsure whether it was the right choice. But even in my hesitation, something inside me moved. A feeling so strong and clear that it left no room for doubt. I didn't know what I was feeling or why it was happening, but I couldn't stop it. My hands, almost of their own accord, reached for the water, but the action felt meaningless now. I wasn't thinking. My heart was beating faster, louder than anything else. In that moment, I sensed the weight of everything, the weight of my loyalty to David, the weight of my confusion, and the weight of what I was feeling for Thomas. It all collided in a single moment, one that made my body tremble despite the calmness of the water around me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was too late to turn back, even though I didn't know what back meant. My gaze met his for the first time, and in that instant, everything else faded. There was no longer a bathroom, no longer the sound of the rain against the windows, no longer the quiet hum of the house. There was only Thomas. And me? The space between us was gone. In the moment our eyes met, it felt as if the world had shifted, leaving nothing but us. My heart hammered in my chest, but now the sound of it seemed to merge with the soft, steady flow of the water. Everything in me wanted to pull away, to make sense of what was happening, but at the same time, I was unable to move. My body, my mind, everything felt suspended between two extremes, between the life I had known and the storm that Thomas seemed to carry with him. "Eliza?" Thomas whispered, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "I don't have to ask how you are feeling, do I?" The words sent a shiver through me, but not from cold. It was as if he had seen straight through the walls I had built around myself. In that moment, I realized I was no longer sure of where the boundaries lay between desire and fear, between right and wrong. I had been locked in my own head for so long, living in the emptiness of my marriage to David. And now, the tension that had been simmering inside me seemed to break free, unfurling like a storm. Thomas's gaze never wavered, and I couldn't look away. His eyes were filled with an intensity that made everything else seem so distant, so irrelevant. There was no way to explain it, no way to make sense of the feelings swirling in my chest. But the pull was undeniable. Slowly, carefully, he took another step closer. His breath was shallow now, and I could feel it against my skin, the space between us closing with every passing second. It felt impossible to move, as though I had been frozen in place. Yet everything inside me urged me to respond, to reach out. My hands trembled at my sides, and I wanted so badly to turn around, to face him fully, but the words that hung in the air seemed to trap me in place. It wasn't just his presence, it was the complexity of the emotions swirling within me, a mixture of guilt and desire, fear and anticipation. I had been so sure of everything in my life, of my marriage to David, of my place in the world. But now, standing here with Thomas so close, everything felt uncertain. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice barely audible, a breath escaping from my lips. But even as I spoke, the words felt wrong, like they were meant for something else, something deeper than I could grasp. He stepped closer, and before I could stop myself, my hand reached out toward him. A gesture so simple, yet filled with so much meaning. I couldn't control it. It was as if my body had taken over, moving without my mind's consent. His hand met mine, warm and steady, and the contact sent a ripple through me, a jolt of electricity that seemed to spread through every fibre of my being. His fingers curled around mine, guiding me closer, and in that moment, I was lost. The tension in the room, the tension in my body, grew unbearable as he moved even closer, his hands finding my waist, his touch gentle but firm. The world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us, standing on the edge of something neither of us fully understood. "Eliza?" Thomas said again, his voice low and filled with something that made my heart race even faster. "You feel it too, don't you?" I wanted to speak, to say something, but the words were stuck, tangled in the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Yes, I felt it. I felt everything, but I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what it meant. Before I could even process what was happening, Thomas moved closer, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered my name once more. The warmth of his breath, the closeness of his body, made my heart race in a way I couldn't control. His hands slid gently down my back, and I felt my pulse quicken. There was no turning back now, no escape from the pull between us. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, trying to gather my thoughts, but they slipped away like water through my fingers. Every part of me seemed to want to surrender, to give in to the overwhelming emotions that I couldn't understand but knew were real. Thomas didn't move away. Instead, he tilted his head, his lips hovering just inches from mine. I could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of what was about to happen. My mind screamed at me to stop, to pull away, but my body refused to listen. The longing that had built up in me over the years of loneliness and isolation seemed to find its release in him, in the way his touch made me feel alive, in a way I hadn't felt in so long. "Is this real?" I whispered, my voice shaky, unsure of myself, unsure of what I was asking. I wasn't even sure what I meant anymore. Was it the connection, the attraction, or something deeper? Something that went beyond words? His lips were so close now, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "This is just between us," he murmured, his lips brushing against mine as he closed the last sliver of space between us. And then we kissed. In that instant, the world disappeared. Every thought, every fear, every ounce of hesitation melted away. The kiss was gentle at first, as if we were both afraid of the consequences, afraid of the depth of what was happening. But soon, the kiss deepened, as if we were both drawn into it, pulled into each other by some invisible force neither of us could resist. His hands explored, slow and deliberate, awakening feelings inside me that I had long buried. The emotions, the desires, all of it came rushing to the surface, tangled with guilt and longing. But for that moment, nothing else mattered. It was just us, just the two of us, caught in the storm that had been building for so long. I could still feel the weight of the conflict inside me, the pull between what I knew was right and what my heart, my body was telling me. But in that moment, nothing else existed. There was no past, No future, only now. As we pulled apart, our breath mingling, I looked into his eyes, and for a moment, everything seemed to fall into place. But just as quickly, the reality of what we had done, of what I'd done, hit me. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice breaking, "what have we done?" But there was no answer, no easy explanation, only the lingering sensation of his touch and the knowledge that something had shifted, something had changed between us. And I wasn't sure if there was any going back.